Come join Melissa and her guests on the Chats from the Blog Cabin podcast. From North Carolina, this podcast will have you feeling like you've known these folks for years. Listen in as they chat about life, culture, current events, and more, all with a special Southern flair. Curl up with your favorite beverage and get ready to be entertained. Tune in now for a unique experience that's fun and insightful.
Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Chats from the Blog Cabin. You know, we're the show where I invite people virtually into the Blog Cabin to chat about life. And today we're going to be chatting about a case called the West Memphis 3 murder case. It's a documentary as well on HBO. The book is called A Harvest of Innocence. And Dan, one of the authors, who also happened to be one of the lawyers in this case, is joining us today. So welcome, Dan. Tell us a little about yourself before we get into talking about the Harvest of Innocence.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to appear on your show. My name is Dan Stidham, and 32 years ago, I was appointed by the court to represent a mentally challenged teenager who was 17 and who gave a false confession regarding the deaths of 3 8-year-old boys, which was a horrible, horrible scene. And I spent the last 32 years looking for the real killer, and it took us 18 years and 78 days to get them free from bondage, so to speak, out of prison, but they're still staying for life because in order to get out of prison, they dangled an Alford plea in front of them. So they're out of prison, but they still have these convictions, and it's not fair because they're completely, totally innocent. And this case has not left the headlines at any point during the last 32 years, and it's amazing the emails and things I get from all over the world. It's a worldwide phenomenon. We're selling books all over the world. It really baffles me sometimes when I look at where the sales are coming from. It's a story about the older me, 62 now instead of 30 years old, and so the book is the older Dan looking back on the younger Dan, and with a little bit of pride and a little bit of, boy, I wish I'd have done something different than that. I wish I would have had a little more experience. This was my first jury trial as first chair. And, you know, I have children who are 30 years old, and I look at them and I can't even imagine them doing what I did and went through. But you get handed a task and you do it. I'm still a judge, planning on retiring at the end of the year. And I was elected back in 2000, became a full-time judge in 2000. And I've been a judge now. This is my 25th year, and so I'm going to go on to do other things, and I'm looking forward to spending more time with the grandkids and working on this case. There's still a lot of work to do, and as you probably are aware, and your listeners may be aware as well, the Arkansas Supreme Court remanded the case back to the trial court on the issue of letting us retest the evidence again with more advanced DNA technology. I was at CrimeCon last year in Nashville and got a presentation of how the MVAC machine works, and it's amazing to watch. It really gathers so much more data and information, and hopefully these partial DNA samples that we have can be amplified and create a full profile that we can run through the system and or check suspects ourselves clandestinely if necessary, whatever it takes. But it's been an interesting ride. I look back now and I wonder where the last 30 years went, because I've been so busy with the case and life in general, and of course life is life. It throws curveballs at you, and the key is perseverance. And I may not be the smartest lawyer in the world or the best lawyer in the world, but you won't find anybody that'll work harder than me, and I'll never give up no matter what. And that's what it took. I certainly wasn't alone in this endeavor and have never taken credit for, or full credit, I should say, but we had a massive army of volunteers and people from all over the world who came forward to demand that this injustice be corrected. And the state of Arkansas took the coward's way out and threw this Alford plea at him, and who could blame him for taking it? I mean, you've been locked in a cell, especially Mr. Eccles, in solitary confinement for almost 2 decades, and someone says, if you just admit that you did it while maintaining your innocence, we'll let you go home, walk off death row. That doesn't happen very often. In fact, I think you probably count them all on one hand in jurisprudence, in the history of jurisprudence. So it's, and there's a new generation of people who are discovering the case for the first time, which I find amazing. Travel the country and speak. The crowds, of course, are getting younger, and I'm getting older. But I was given a presentation at my alma mater, the University of Arkansas School of Law in Fayetteville, and I mentioned Eddie Vedder, and everybody looked at me like, "Who's that?" And I thought, wow, I have gotten older. So they didn't know what Pearl Jam was or who Eddie Vedder was. I was just astonished. But our statistics and book sales show that that's our 25 to 35-year-olds are the people who are buying most of the books. And I find that astonishing, considering the time that's gone by. A lot of people ask me, why did it take so long to write this book? And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, the Alford plea, which I was not an architect of or had no part in. In fact, I didn't even know about it until the night before. So I didn't understand how it came about until after it was over. In the 10 years that it took to write the book after the Alford plea, because I couldn't write the book before, obviously, because I had to count on the Supreme Court to make a favorable ruling for us. And, poking the bear is not the best way to do that. So I decided to go full-time writing with my co-author, Tom McCarthy, who is absolutely amazing. I'm a lawyer and a judge, and I speak a different language than lay people do. And it's like watching doctors on TV and they're all saying all these words and you don't know what they're saying, but that you can kind of understand a little bit about what's going on. But he took my legalese and chapters that were 30 pages long and condensed it into 3 or 4 paragraphs and said it in layman's terms. And so it was amazing to watch. So he's just an outstanding gentleman to work with and a great friend.
Now, you mentioned the Alford plea. What is that for people that are listening and wondering, okay, what is this all about?
Well, I had been doing this for many, many years, and that was in 2011. So it's been many years since then, but I didn't know what it was in 2011. The prosecutor called me the night before and said, "Hey, your boy is getting out tomorrow." And I said, "Boy, what are you talking about?" And we were gearing up for a new trial. We all thought we were going to get a new trial because we had completely dismantled the state's case. They didn't have a case anymore, and they didn't want to go to trial. That's where the Alford plea came in. If they took the Alford plea and walked out of prison that day, then they had no recourse to sue the state for damages and reparations for the best years of their lives that they lost, plus all the trauma. So all these people got to jump off the sinking ship and swim to shore safely without having to atone for their sins, so to speak. And I wrote the book so that there would be a true accounting of what actually happened. And of course, the world was very different 32 years ago than it is today because the internet was brand new. And we had some folks from Hollywood get involved and created a website. And the celebrities got involved after the Paradise Lost films from HBO came out. And a lot of people, could empathize with the 3 defendants because they were different and they were from the wrong side of the tracks and they were easy targets. My client, especially because of his mental incapacity. And we found out later post-trial that he has MR. He's mental retardation, and it's a static condition. There's no treatment, no pill, nothing. Mr. Meskelly wasn't fit to stand trial. He didn't understand the proceedings against him. It was like not even having a client because I had trouble communicating with him. But once I reached that conclusion, about halfway into the case, that he was innocent, everything changed. And then the fight was on. But we dodged the death penalty, which was good, but it still wasn't enough for me. I wanted a full acquittal, still do. That's why I continue to work on the case. I'm running down suspects. At the end of the year when I retire, I'll have more time to do that. I've got 2 that I need to track down and learn more about. And also, we do have a partial DNA sample from Terry Hobbs, one of the stepfathers in the case. And so his DNA was located inside one of the ligatures on the bodies. And so that's pretty damning evidence. It's certainly more evidence than there ever was against the West Memphis Three, because Mr. Miskelly's confession was not only filled with inconsistencies, but it was completely filled with total inaccuracies. So after that completely unraveled, the state of Arkansas was left with the option of going forth with 3 new trials. A lot of the witnesses have passed away. A lot of the evidence is not where it's supposed to be. So it's actually a miracle that it even still exists after all these years. But we have a real opportunity here to solve this case, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
Yeah, you say a lot of celebrities have got involved. It sounds like something, because I watched the Kardashians, that Kim Kardashian would be involved in, like 100%, because she's done a lot of different things for other people. Who knows? Maybe she'll hear about this case and get involved as well and bring more light.
And the amazing thing about this is once I published the book, I started getting phone calls and emails immediately from witnesses who were afraid to come forward because they were afraid they were going to get caught in the web of this well-told campfire story, as my friend Sean Flynn so aptly called it. Back in the late 80s, or back the entire decade of the 80s and the early 90s, there was this satanic panic that had gripped the nation, and especially the southern part of the country where the Bible Belt is, where I'm currently located. And people take that stuff serious, and when they can't explain something that was so horrible as this, they turn to the supernatural for an explanation. And the same thing happened in Salem, Massachusetts, 300 years ago, almost to the day. And so that's why this case is often referred to as the Arkansas witch trials, but there was no satanic aspects to this at all, because there's no such thing as satanic ritualistic homicide. FBI has done an extensive study and determined that it doesn't exist. Now, there's a difference between someone who murders someone or a number of people and says, the devil told me to do it. Son of Sam or the Night Stalker come to mind, but that's not always the case. There's a lot of different avenues to go down, and a lot of work left to do. And as the years go by, it gets more difficult. More celebrities we could get involved, because this is stuff we're going to have to pay for ourselves. The state of Arkansas is not going to pay for this DNA testing, and it's very, very expensive. And right now, the lawyers are, depending on who you ask, either negotiating or arguing over what's going to be tested, where it's going to be tested, and what the protocols are. And of course, trying to get that many lawyers to agree on anything is pretty difficult in most instances.
Yep. So we need to take a brief commercial break. But when we come back, you're going to read part of Harvest of Innocence, and we'll talk more about it.
Sounds great.
Imagine having a tool that unlocks all the secrets to your body. All those times that your body has tried to communicate with you, and maybe you've listened, ignored, or maybe you didn't even know that your body was talking to you. This tool will change your life. And all you have to do is click on the link www.betheglow.com/Melissa, and you can download this guide for free. It's My Body is My Compass guide, and it will teach you this one tool to be able to use your body as a guide, as a compass, to always know what your body needs in any given moment.
And we are back with Dan. He is the author of A Harvest of Innocence, and he's going to read part of his book, and then we'll get more into this discussion. So Dan, it's all yours.
All right, thank you. This is the introduction to Harvest of Innocence, and the title of the book came from a news article about after the Miss Kelly case was over, where a reporter referred to the case as a harvest of innocence, an evil harvest of innocence. But that's why I chose that as the title. But A Harvest of Innocence is my story, and until now untold, regarding my involvement in the West Memphis 3 murder case. I stepped into its current as a young lawyer, unaware of its strength and the immutable, unpredictable eddies that would forever change my life and my view of the law. I tell it now because it must be told. I've spent most of the past 30 years viewed in widely disparate lights. In the beginning, to some, I was a pariah, a man so bold as to represent a teenager accused of being a satanic child killer. Much later, others began to respect my efforts in seeking justice for Jesse Miss Kelly. In the real world, it is much more complicated than that. I was nothing more than a lawyer committed to doing my job, what was required of me by my moral compass. As a reward for my efforts, I spent a good deal of the past 30 years being pummeled by those hell-bent on stopping my quest for justice for the West Memphis 3, young men who spent nearly 2 decades in prison for heinous crimes they simply did not commit. Bucking the system has its consequences. There's a hellish experience awaiting for you if you find yourself in that unfortunate situation. The day the Paragould Daily Press, which is my hometown newspaper, published an article about my writing this book, I received several death threats from 2 continents, and someone blew up my mailbox with a small homemade bomb. This was the second time that this had happened, and publishing this book will no doubt bring me more challenges. So that's the introduction to my book. That's why I wrote the book. I wanted there to be a factual accounting of the case and all the things that the prosecutor and the trial judge did that shouldn't have happened, that a young lawyer wasn't fully aware of because of my lack of experience at the time. I always tell people that, if I had it to do over again, they ask me, would you do it again? If I wouldn't change a thing, I really wouldn't. Just my view, as I said in the introduction, about the law has changed. I was very idealistic as a young lawyer. I believed in justice, and I believed in the sanctity of the courtroom, and that our system was the best in the world, and it is the best in the world, but we make mistakes, and we need to fix those mistakes, and we need to take measures to make sure that these kind of mistakes don't happen anymore, because it's hard to even imagine being in a 10 by 10 concrete cell for 23 hours every day for almost 20 years. And I know what it's done to me and my health, mental and physical health and well-being, and the toll it took on my family, but that pales in comparison to what these kids went through, and of course the families of the victims. Having lost a child myself, an adult child, I certainly can, in a greater capacity than I could before. That's a club you don't want to be in. You don't want to join that club. And so after my son passed away in 2021, I actually took the entire manuscript and poured it through that filter, because I felt that it was important for me to show as much respect as possible for these families who lost their 8-year-old kids. I got 34 years with my son before he passed, and they only got 8 with theirs. And so I wanted to make sure that I was as sensitive as I could be about that particular topic. But in 2025, I'm getting ready to retire, and I've got some grandkids that are young and lots of fun to play with. And I'm just going to practice law and do some traveling and work on this case. And hopefully in my lifetime, there'll be a conclusion, but I think there will be eventually, one way or the other.
So I have 2 questions from what you just said. You talked about the prosecution and the judge on the case, and in the book, you talk a lot about the judge and some of the things that the judge did that wasn't quite appropriate for a judge to do. Did that shape the kind of judge that you wanted to be? Did that shape the kind, like knowing that, okay, I got to be impartial, I want to be better than my predecessors? Did that shape how you were as a judge?
Certainly. The case itself did that, not only for me professionally as a judge, but also I think it made me a better person. It made me a better father. It made me just a better person because I've seen what our justice system really is and the promises that it makes and doesn't sometimes fulfill. And I want to spend the rest of my life trying to prevent this kind of tragedy from happening again. And unfortunately, there's bad people in this world and evil exists, and there's going to be bad things that happen to good people for no real good reason, whether someone takes someone's life because they're mentally ill or whatever the case may be. This case is unique, and my guess is they'll still be talking about it 300 years from now, like we talk about Salem. But at least in Salem, after 18 months of the lunacy, they stopped it and said, you can't do this anymore. You can't point at somebody and say you're a witch. And people were grabbing each other's land. And it was just, they even hung a dog. It's just crazy. And of course, there were allegations of dogs being eaten and all this crazy stuff that was going on with this satanic stuff. And back in those days, with all the movies and the media, with the slasher movies and it's ironic, I guess, is the only word I can find to describe it, that Jason and Damien had names that matched some bad guys in some horror flicks, and that didn't help matters much. Nor did Mr. Eccles' attitude about the case. He was under the sad mistake that you can't be convicted if you're not guilty. And now he realizes that part of the reason that things happened the way they did is because of the way he reacted. And it is what it is. But I have a lot of respect for all three of these young men. I haven't seen Damien in some time. In fact, the last time I saw him was in 2015. When Bruce Sinofsky, one of the HBO documentarians, passed away, his memorial service in New York. I visit with Jason quite often. He and I have become good friends over the years, even though I didn't represent him. I did a few times from the booger bushes where nobody could see me because there was nobody else to do it. So I had to do it myself to keep the time limits from running. But sometimes you just got to do what you got to do to make things right. And that's what this book's about. It's about dispelling all the myths that are out there. There's just so much garbage out there on the internet about this. It's almost, like the JFK conspiracy or something. It's kind of grown and grown and grown. And the interesting thing about my book is I really haven't received that much blowback from anybody. I was expecting my mailbox to get blown up again and, threats. I think it's a testament to the way the book was written and how it explained in detail in a way that people could understand what really happened and what shouldn't have happened. And so that gives me hope, at least, that I succeeded in my mission to set the record straight and dispel all these mythologies that are out there.
Do you think if the case had been brought now, if it occurred now in modern times, that it would have been a different outcome? Because now you have social media, and you said the websites were very new when this happened. But do you think the outcry would be more since social media and everything?
Yes, and of course we're seeing others using that same model, and of course I think that celebrities have the right to get involved in things. We all do. As part of being in a democracy is being able to express yourself. There are limitations on that, of course, but it's important for me to find the truth, and I'm going to keep doing that as long as I can.
Now, you said you had very little blowback from the book when it came out. Have the families of the victims, or the families of even the ones that were innocent but they were put in jail and they were convicted of this crime, have they responded? Have they reached out to you?
No, life has been such a whirlwind since I published the book in November of 23, and two of the three victims' families ended up on the defense team in our camp, Pam Hobbs, and who I respect and pray for daily because of all the trauma she sustained in losing a child, and then the implications if in fact Mr. Hobbs had something to do with it. That's of course going to be another traumatic experience. But the only people that seemed to take issue was Mr. Moore, the father of Michael Moore. And he said my book was a fairy tale, and I get it. I don't harbor any ill feelings. I didn't expect anything less. And he's holding on to what he can hold on to and what makes him feel the way he needs to feel, and I understand that more than I've ever have. And but hopefully we'll be able to solve this thing. I've just got a really good feeling that something good's going to come out of this new testing, and hopefully it'll happen soon. They said April. Now we're into May and almost into June. And as a judge, all I can do is sit back and watch. So once I retire, then I'll be able to get back in, roll up my sleeves, and dive back in. So I'm looking forward to that and just slowing down a little bit. But this case has had a huge impact on everybody. And people who read my book will often contact me and say, I just can't believe you went through all that and came out the other end and still intact. The storm passed and I didn't get caught up in the debris. And I had some dark days, I'll tell you that. But it affected my kids a lot. They were stoic about it, but they knew that their dad was doing something important, and they think it's great. Hopefully we'll find a killer soon.
Yeah, because you mentioned in the book, I think you said your daughter was either just born or a toddler when you first started this case, and then she was like in high school at the point when you finally got it?
She was born in 95, so 2 years after the homicides occurred. Mm-hmm. And so she doesn't really have any memory of course, my youngest was born in 95, and he doesn't. I don't think he's ever watched any of the documentaries. He just has no interest in it. I'm just dad to him, so that's fine with me. My law partner, Mr. Crow, has never been able to watch any of the documentaries just because of the trauma. And it was difficult for me to write the book, reliving all of that again, going back through all the transcripts and all the newspaper articles and motions. It just was like reliving a nightmare. It's like Dr. Bodden said when I stalked him, literally, I stalked him in an elevator in San Francisco and got him to look at my case file. And for the first time, I felt like we really had a chance, because this wasn't a satanic ritual at all. It was animal predation. After the bodies were thrown in the water. Arkansas is a rural area right there. This happened pretty close to the Mississippi River, within a couple miles. And it's the third busiest interstate highway exchange in the country. And you could throw a baseball from where the bodies were recovered to the interstate and to the truck stop next door and the truck wash next door. Mm-hmm. One of my theories and suspects is an over-the-road truck driver and that I can put in the area around the time of the murders. So I'm looking forward to pursuing that with a little more time on my hands. They keep me so busy as judge, I barely have time to sleep.
That's what I was going to ask you. Were you able to still actively investigate while you're being a judge? Or is there rules that you can't do that?
No, I can't. After all these years have gone by and the case has reached its conclusion, and technically it has, even though we're being allowed to retest because of the language of the statute, which I'm sure will be changed if it hasn't already. But I just, ethically, I can't get involved other than be a cheerleader. And when I wrote the book, I had no idea that the Supreme Court 5 months later would rule that we could retest that evidence. I never thought that would happen. And so we've got a really good shot at this. And I'm very proud of the Arkansas Supreme Court for doing what they did and remanding the case back to the trial judge and saying, hey, this stuff is available. And it doesn't say you have to be a prisoner to avail yourself of this. So the plain, simple meaning of the statute was very clear. I know the person who drafted it and introduced it into the legislature. So it's very clear. In fact, it was a model statute that started kind of going around the country to the different states after the Barry Scheck and the Innocence Project got started. And at last count, I think they're up to 353 exonerations since the inception of the Innocence Project, which is absolutely amazing. And when they went through and did their studies, they discovered that false confessions was one of the leading causes of wrongful convictions. I go into, in the book, detail by detail about everything about his mental capabilities and inabilities. And Mr. Miskelly, who I love dearly like a child. He's like my own son. And in fact, one of the sad parts of the book, I probably shouldn't give it away, but one day I was working on the appeal, and my son Daniel, who will be 40 this year, to tell you, he was born in 85, so he was old enough to remember this, of course, and he's just started law school. My daughter's a lawyer, so it's kind of become, I have a son who's a doctor, chiropractor. So I'm going to get an opportunity to work with my son doing some legal work for his company. And I'm looking forward to that and traveling and working on the case full time again. And there's still a lot of rocks to turn over.
So what are each one of the defendants? What are each one of them doing now? How are they doing now?
Well, Jesse, of course, Jesse is a concrete thinker, and as opposed to an abstract thinker. You and I can reason, just conversation that we're having right now. We understand that if we say something inappropriate, there's going to be consequences to that. There should be anyway. If there's, I've made it through 25 years on the bench without getting in trouble for saying something. I hope to make it through this interview doing that, but the point of the matter is he doesn't understand that there are consequences. The only thing he's concerned about at any given moment is, how do I get out of this moment, and how do I make this stop? 12 hours of interrogation will make anybody say anything. The average is about 4 hours. And you don't have to be mentally handicapped to break. We see it with our soldiers in battle and combat who are trained and to deal with these kind of things. And when they get captured, you don't see the AK-47 pointed at their head off screen when they're making these videotapes. They're being tortured. So, and Mr. Miskelly wasn't physically tortured, but he was mentally taken advantage of and abused. And if they'd have just taken him to the scene of the crime and asked him to point out where everything happened, they would have understood that he had nothing to do with it. And of course, when he didn't have anything to do with it, there's no reason to suspect the other two did either. And I know in my heart of hearts that they're definitely 100% innocent. And my book seems to be having that intended effect on people. They're reading it and they're saying, hey, it makes sense now. It didn't make sense before because the offer plea doesn't make any sense. How do you plead guilty while maintaining your innocence? It's just like a tie football game, or, and I go into detail about how tough it was for me as a lawyer after all these years of fighting and getting kicked in the teeth and appeals denied at one after the other. And then as the years go by and the decades go by, I see that the U.S. Supreme Court ruling in my favor the same arguments that I made 30 years ago to them. And about, it's cruel and unusual to give the death penalty to a teenager whose brain isn't fully developed yet. In fact, you can make a good argument that your brain doesn't fully develop until your early 20s, mid 20s in some cases. So that doesn't mean you're not responsible for your conduct, but it means that, you should be judged by your age and experience, not punished just for the sake of punishment, especially when you got the death penalty involved.
Yeah, for sure. Now, our time is almost up. Is there one last thing that you want to leave us with before we talk about where they can buy the book and where they can contact you? Like either something that you've talked about that you want to reiterate, or something that we didn't talk about that you feel like it's very important to share as well?
Well, it's not very often that I'm without words. I'll be honest with you.
Mhm.
I don't think anybody's ever asked me that question before. I'm not sure how to answer that. To be completely candid with you, I'm not trying to be coy at all. I think people are genuinely interested in the story aspect of it because we chose a non-linear narrative. And what I mean by that, it's like the movie Lincoln or the Titanic. I didn't want to go to the theater and see the Titanic when it came out because I knew what happened. The boat sank. And in this particular case, everybody knows that the West Memphis Three were convicted. One was on death row and the other got life. The other two got life in prison. And so when we went to publishers, it's like, well, what's new? There's already been 4 documentaries, 1 feature film that I turned down $100,000 to not be in for a real good reason, and because it didn't even closely resemble the case at all. I guess, but I didn't want to be a part of that horror story. This case is horrific enough as it is. It's an atrocity. It's a human atrocity that was met by another human atrocity, and that is convicting 3 innocent kids. So you tell me when we're out of time, but the book, people tell me that once they start reading it, they can't put it down. We debuted on Amazon at #1 on day 1, and we're still one of the top selling books across all formats and genres on Amazon. So I'm really proud of it's never been about money to me. It's been about telling the truth and telling the story and having the courage to open up and tell my story. It's like the old lady on the boat on the Titanic telling her story, but we're all sitting there watching the movie thinking we can save this, we can change the outcome, or President Lincoln's not going to die. He got shot. And it's just it's a great way to tell a story that people are familiar with, but they're not familiar with the background. So that's why I think the book is important, because it takes a story that a lot of people are familiar with. Now, the younger people that seem to be the largest consumers don't have that. They have the knowledge from the documentaries. They go back and watch them and then read Mara Leverett's book, Devil's Knot. And my book is really more about me and my story than it is the case itself, because I didn't want to retell the story. I wanted to tell the story from behind the scenes by someone who was there the entire time. All the other lawyers tucked tail and run. I was the only one that stayed, and that's why I had to represent Mr. Baldwin sometimes, sneak in and sneak out like a ninja. But you just got to do what you got to do sometimes to get where you need to get. So I hope people find it interesting. My first book signing, they were lined up around the block, and I was stunned. And it was cold. It was December. It was raining, and several people said they read the book standing in line for me to autograph it, and told me they called in sick the next day at work to finish it because they couldn't put it down. And it answers all these questions that have been dogging people for years. What really went on? I can't yet say exactly what went on, but I'm looking forward to a revised edition of my book, hopefully with naming the actual killer.
That would be so cool. So your book is on Amazon. It's called A Harvest of Innocence. Where else can they find it besides Amazon?
It's on Walmart.com, BarnesandNobles.com. Our ebook is out as well, and our audiobook came out last year, and it is now starting to really pick up in sales. People were I didn't realize the world had changed that much, but people who commute and people who travel a lot like to be able to listen to podcasts and read books and listen to books. And so it's a lot of work went into that. And I started as the narrator, and I just couldn't do it. It was too painful for me to and it was painful for me to read the introduction a while ago. You may have seen the anxiety in my face and my words, but well, thank you. But it's important, not just for this case, but for our legal system. And we have a situation going on in our country right now where there's absolutely total disrespect for the judiciary. And our democracy is based on a 3-tier system and checks and balances. And right now, it's scary.
It is very scary.
No matter what side of the issue you're on, As a judge, I'm not a political person or a political animal, but I'm smart enough to know what the Constitution is and what it isn't. And we're seeing a lot of things that aren't. And, so it's a brave new world out there. I hope we can survive it.
Hopefully so. And people can find you where if they want to contact you.
DanStidham.com, www.danstidham.com, DanStidham.com. And I'm also on Facebook, The Harvest of Innocence. And also I have a personal page that unfortunately people seem to gravitate towards that more than they do the other one. But,
it's easier to look up a name than it is.
And of course, I really thought this out when I put my email on the websites for people to send me tips or just talk about the case. My email address is harvestofinnocence@outlook.com, and it's almost impossible for me to even spell that all out at once.
Yep.
I should have picked a little easier email address, but nonetheless, I am praying fervently for a resolution to this horrible, horrible nightmare, and that maybe people can get some closure from one of the most talked about cases in the last century.
Yep, for sure. Well, Dan, go ahead, continue.
Oh, I was just going to say, and as I said earlier, it's never left the news. I just keeping my fingers crossed.
Yep. And you raised a great couple of questions in this book. So if anybody's interested, if you like true crime books, definitely pick up A Harvest of Innocence, because you can see some of the misjustice of some of the abuse of power of some of our prosecutors and the judges and things like that, not allowing certain things to be said or allowing things to go through that were very prejudicial against these defendants. So I hope you do come out with an epilogue to the book, and when it does happen, you are more than welcome to come back and talk about the outcome of the case.
That would be fantastic. I appreciate I hope that occurs, and I will be proud to come back on, and thank you so much for inviting me, and I really enjoyed our conversation so much.
Yeah, thank you, Dan, for coming on and for sharing about this case. Hopefully we'll get answers soon. Guys, until next time, I will put everything in the show notes, as well as where you can contact Dan if you have any information about this case at all. I know he would love to run down some leads now that he's going to be coming in December. You're retiring in December?
December 31st, January 1. December 31st will be my last day.
So you'll have plenty of time to run down all those leads after that. So I will put everything that he's mentioned in the show notes, as well as where you can buy the book and where you can contact him as well. So until next time, guys, bye. And
thank you so much.